Hello everyone, and happy Halloween. The nicest part of Halloween, in my opinion, is the sight of all the bright and cheerful pumpkins that suddenly appear everywhere, especially in the fields around here. So this time I'm going to demonstrate some of these wonderful things and hopefully capture their colours. My intention is to actually try to create a more natural environment for them. And so I'm going to use the pipette to indicate veins and veining, tendrils and bits of straw and twigs and things like that. So first of all I want to show you how to do a little bit of pipetting. But these are the colours that I'm going to use in my selection of pumpkins, squash and gourds. And you can actually use the pipette with the drawing gum as well as the paint. And you use it in exactly the same way, apart from if you are going to use the masking fluid to create some pipetting, as you'll see in a minute when I show you my prepared picture. Pop some into a separate little vessel and pipette a little tiny bit of water in and mix it with the masking fluid, especially if your masking fluid has gone a bit thick, because it actually helps it to run a bit better if you can actually just water it down a little bit. But right now I'm just going to get a little bit of paint going on, trying to fill my pipette. It's got some water in it, might end up a bit watery. I usually hold it by the little bulbous bit at the end and hold it also a little bit on the side. So I would suggest practicing the way I am to start with, and you can get lovely thick or thin marks. Press the bulb a little bit more, squeeze it if you want it to be slightly thicker, but then stop pressing, take the pressure off when you want to actually create something that's a little bit finer. So you can make all sorts of lovely marks with it. Just practice first though, to get the hang of it. And you can get these pipettes anywhere if you haven't got one. You can also make blobs and move the blobs around if you want to, which is good for sort of spiky things and bits of stalk, and you could create grasses. And it actually makes marks that you couldn't really very easily make with your paintbrush. So here you can see that I've actually created my drawing, and at this stage after the drawing is the time to put the masking fluid on if you want to leave light or white marks such as the veins and stalks and whatever have you. I've just sort of thought that, you know, it would look good to actually also give a bit of perspective by putting the vines, the dried vines in the front. Now I've got to be careful not to actually pull it off when I'm working over the top of it. And the other thing is, wash that pipette out immediately you've finished using it for masking fluid, otherwise you're going to get it stuck in there and you'll have to get another one, or keep it just for masking. So I'm going to start with the bluey grey little pumpkin at the back here. You can work wet on wet, or you can work dry and then wet on the top, and I'm going to paint each individual little section bit by bit. I'm not going to wash right over the top of this one because I want to keep a certain amount of control, and I want to leave white paper and look out for my lights and darks. And of course I can lift off. This is a mix of winter blue, Cadbury yellow deep, with some ultramarine as well. And it's going to dry up slightly lighter than when I've applied it. But you can already see that because I'm working in sections like this, I'm getting that impression of the sections without really having to work too hard at it. So if you've got lots of pumpkins to do, you're going to have lots of patience to work this way. But maybe I won't work all of them in this way, but I certainly want to this one because it's quite a special one. And I don't want to particularly put an undercolour on here, which I will with the orange ones. So I'm going to stop in a minute and fast forward while I paint the rest of this part of the pumpkin. Just going to lift off some light that side there. Right, so I'm stopping just for now. There we are. You may have noticed that I also popped a little bit of shadow colour between the little sections and here and there to give some shadow and some extra markings so that it didn't look too smooth and too uniform. I won't work on the stalk just yet, I'll wait for the rest to dry, but I think I'll paint one of the orange ones now. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of the little munchkin pumpkins. So I'm going to actually pop various colours or different shades of yellow or whatever I decide underneath as a little undercoat so that I can get variation in each one so that they're not all going to end up looking exactly the same. So making sure that I work right over the top of any masking so that I end up with the marks that I originally made. I may have overdone the masking, which is very, very easy to do. And so if I have, with the masking fluid, I can actually peel bits off, but be careful when you're using paint that you don't actually overdo it, because these techniques are all very good, but if you overdo them, it looks always a little bit contrived. So that was Cadbury Yellow Pale, and this one is Cadbury Yellow Deep. So I'm just popping little washes on the top of these first before I brighten them up with deeper colours. That way I'm going to get a lovely variety of oranges and hopefully keeping them nice and bright and cheerful. but this will have a little bit of time to dry before I start painting over the top if I work this way. When you do your original drawing, make sure you start with the focal area, so that if you've got a selection of things like this in a still life, you will end up with everything sitting in the right place, and starting with the focal point and working out from that particular area means that you will end up with a more pleasing end result for people to look at. Right, that was cadmium orange that I've just popped on that one. So let's paint the first one, and I'm going to use some transparent orange on the top here, and again I'm now going to start working in little sections again. So load your brush and then just keep going, and you'll get variation in each little application then as well, which is helpful, just to avoid the monotony. Trying to make it slightly lighter in this area here, where the light might be shining on the top of this little pumpkin. I've got a designer size 10 brush out here at the moment because it's got a nice point. It holds a lot of water because I felt that this would be a slightly looser approach, and it's holding a lot of water for me, but got a lovely point which is enabling me to get into these little shapes fairly easily. Right, so I've got some nice light at the front here, and at some point I want to put some orange or some deeper shadow colour on there, but I'm going to leave it right now. Just giving it a bit of texture. Waiting for that to dry a little bit more, excuse me. Right. I'll paint one more little munchkin before speeding up again, or at least part of this one perhaps. Keeping that area light there against the darker colour of the pumpkin. This is Cad Free Yellow Deep. popping a little bit of orange on the top of this one so that it won't look exactly like its neighbour, but it's picking up that same tone again. Lift off some light here, I think. Oh, good. So I'll speed up while I paint the next two. Okay, now it's still a little early to put shadow marks on, I think. So I think I'm just going to stop completely for the moment and just let it dry a bit first. I took a bit of a risk there and put the hairdryer on, which isn't the most sensible thing to do with masking fluid because it really doesn't like the heat. But I'm being impatient, so that's not something I would suggest that you do. Just wait if you can. So I'm actually just popping a little bit of purple over the top between the sections just to create those deeper markings. So use a nice colour for this so that you don't end up with a muddier colour that's going to take the lovely orange tinge away from those pumpkins. I'm using quite a lot of water with this brush. So you've got to be careful to keep this looking as natural as possible. I don't really want to create hard-edged lines, so catching it before it's too dry is a good idea if you can. Maybe I dried it a little bit too much, but you can always go back and just pop a little bit of the orange between these, you know, just let it float around a bit to make texture marks and just let the paint play around a bit, which will stop it looking too uniform and too contrived. And as always, I guess the less you touch it, the better. But that's actually looking all right. It's going to look completely different when it's dry. So a little bit of shadow where it's standing. Remembering always with little still life subjects, we need to ground things. Alright, I'll just speed up again while I finish off these. Right, well, they're still very wet, but they're actually showing quite a lot of variation, I think. So I'll start work, I think, on the stalks. Or shall I do, yeah, I've got a very complicated looking gourd here, which I think maybe I should at least do part of. So I'm going to put down first a little wash of some yellow here for the light, and then changing it to a very weak wash of raw sienna. I'll probably paint this one wet on wet, I think, because it's got lots of It's a gourd and it's got lots of different markings and colours in it. Try not to touch my wet paint. Right, so for what we've got here is some green and some orange in that one. So it's quite a dark green. So I've got aqua green and I'm popping a little bit of Payne's grey with it to make it darker. And I can't hope to create the markings, I don't want to create the markings that I actually see in here, but I'm going to actually just drop the colour in. And let it make its way in the wet paint and hope that that's going to work. At the same time as trying to show off some of the sections in it, working over my masking. It's a big patch this side here. So easing up this side. So don't be afraid of trying things like this. If you don't try, you're never going to know if it will work. Nice and dark down here to show off the shape. So you use your imagination at the same time as using the image that you see in front of you. And it's got a few little areas of orange between. So unless I go over that masking, it's not going to show up. So I need to make sure it does. So just gone a little bit deeper there for that reason. Lots to think about. I think that's going to be enough. Better to leave it really for now and see what happens when it's dry, and if necessary put more on after a while. But now I'll try and put a few of those stalks in because time's running away. I've elongated them. I've made them much longer than they actually appear to be in reality because they've been cut off, but obviously they were much longer. So think about what things look like in the field or wherever before they've been tampered with, and try and use your imagination. So they're green, brown, little mixture of colours going on in them, darks and lights. So start off putting a basic sort of shape down to get colours, to get what you see underneath, and then go back and put the dark in afterwards. Need to do that to make it look a little bit more rounded. It's looking flat at the minute, so when it's drier I can do something about creating a bit more form in it. But that's the way they're looking, really. So I'll speed up and paint some more. Mixing some burnt sienna and ultramarine blue together will make a nice dark for this. Okay, they're very wet, they've got to dry, and then I can put more markings onto them if I need to. But it's nice just to leave the paint for the moment and then see what happens before touching it up. Right, so now I want to paint some leaf. I've got various bits of leaf that have got holes in them. So what we're looking for is a more natural effect with leaves and the actual whole subject. It's all looking very sort of autumny out there at the moment, isn't it? So I'm mixing up a green that I haven't already got. In fact, I didn't have any leaves of these pumpkins, so I just took a look at the courgette leaves in the garden, which look very similar, so that I could get an idea of what they might look like. So I'm just quickly going to paint some leaf, and they've got holes in them, so I want to try and create that sort of scruffy natural effect with the leaves as well, giving them variation in tone. Very, very Eton. So just working around some little shapes that I've drawn for myself so that I didn't forget to actually leave a holy appearance. Popping a little bit of another colour in is always a good idea, a nice autumn colour, because they're starting to tan, and also it's going to pick up the colour in the pumpkins. I'm going to have to go back there because I've lost the shape of this stalk. I want to put some dark behind, but because the stalk is still really wet, I have to leave that for now. So trying to get a different green. It's a little difficult working at the moment because everything is very wet. Obviously you can take your time if you decide to paint some of these pumpkins and things, so that you're not working in an odd way like this. Normally I would turn my paper round, but I may not get it back in the right position if I start doing things like that. Right, I'm going to stop, finish off the leaves, and then come back. Right, I quickly did the leaves, finish off the leaves, and I've quickly popped down some depth of colour underneath, using all the colours that I used within my subjects. And I want to quickly just put some depth into here so that you can see, so it shows up the area between the little leaves and gourds and things. But be careful you don't go too dark, because that's going to show up too much if you do, and the eye will go to the space rather than to the actual subject. So do that carefully and let it dry. But where you've got the opportunity to put some real depth in underneath, then, you know, don't be afraid to go for that, because that's the bit that's going to ground your subject really nicely. It's all still very, very wet. I hoped it would dry in time for me to take the masking off, but I've not really got much of a hope on that. But I have got another one that I can show you that I did earlier with the masking taken off. Right, so that actually does make quite a difference, doesn't it, when you can get the little bits of depth between. It shows it all up quite nicely. So I'm going to have to leave that now to dry for quite some time before I can take off the masking. But here's one that I did for class, and so you can see where I've masked before and taken it off, and I actually did just wash over with a little bit of watered down raw sienna or burnt sienna, raw umber, any of those colours, but very watery. And then I pipetted a few sort of tendril marks and a bit more depth underneath with the pipette. But that's painted similarly, but with a bit more time. So it was a little bit rushed, but I think I showed you the technique, and I think they show up okay. So be careful about creating a nice composition, starting with your focal point. You can use other techniques on here if you wish. You could use salting, you could use splattering, cling film, any of the other techniques that we know of, but be careful not to overdo them so that they look a little bit too contrived. I'm going to have to do something about this leaf here, because I think it looks like a continuation of that pumpkin and creating a funny shape. So I'll actually create a darker colour on there and ground this little pumpkin here a bit more. So it's this point that you see things like that, so make sure that you have a good look at the end and put anything like that right. Okay, so that's all I need to say, I think. Another thing you could do on there, if you don't want to use the pipetting technique, is to use blowing, but it doesn't really make the right sort of marks, depending on your subject. But that is another thing that you could do, use the blowing through straw. It's fun, great fun, painting these, and using these different techniques, so do have a go, and I hope you enjoy it. And I'll be back again on the 15th, painting another lively subject. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.